What's up everyone? In today's lesson, we're going to discuss some ways we can help our students get the most out of the blues scale without actually ever teaching them that little nugget of music theory. All right, before we dig into things, I do just want to give a little bit of a disclaimer at the beginning of this lesson. This is by no means the only way to approach this material, and especially for beginning players, there's a lot of different avenues that they can take to find success. As with all improvisational concepts, working from an oral standpoint first is best. We will talk about some music theory stuff today, very basic music theory. And we want to connect those two dots. We want to start by listening and playing by ear and then connect that to some of the music theory to help us understand what we're hearing. This can sometimes be a kind of dichotomy that I don't think is necessarily so accurate in jazz education, that we either play by ear or we play by knowing the chords. They're both important. The greats surely played by ear, heard things, made them happen, but they also knew music theory. Most of the really great jazz musicians that we think were the masters of this idiom had pretty deep knowledges of kind of music theory, harmony, all this type of stuff. So we want to use both those things at our disposal to be successful. Now, even if we have different viewpoints about the role of music theory and how it relates to learning improvisation, we can agree that the blues scale is typically one of the first things that students are taught when they're taught how to improvise. It certainly was for me, and it is for many, many players. And it can be a great avenue into improvisation. We're just going to talk about some other things that you can think about to get those students started today as well. Now, as we first start our students, and maybe we think, all right, I'm going to start with the blues scale. We teach them the blues scale. We get them so they're feeling comfortable. Inevitably, they go through a period where they're sounding a little bit something like this. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. However, if we choose some other ways to introduce them to this early part of improvisation, we can get them moving along the path to success and really sounding a little more authentic quicker than if we just rely on the blues scale as the only kind of foundational note choice / music theory realm to think of. Today we're going to talk about two other things to work on other than just the blues scale. Number one, pentatonic scales. Now, pentatonic scales are very similar to the blues scale. They have a limited number of notes, and depending what your knowledge base already is, you might already know that they're actually very similar as far as their note choices go. And so why might we want to learn pentatonic scales over the blues scale? The first reason is that pentatonic scales, I think, are a better foundation to lay for students than the blues scale is. Not that the blues scale doesn't have a wide variety of applications. However, pentatonic scales work well across the entire spectrum of sort of improvisational ability. Beginners can find great uses for them, intermediate players can, and advanced players can as well. Okay, cool. Let's dig into actually what these are. Now, if you already feel pretty confident about your knowledge of pentatonic melodies, you could skip forward a little bit into this lesson. However, I do want to make sure that we're all on the same page about what these actually are and how they connect. Today, we're going to work in the key of B flat, and we're going to talk about two scales here, a minor pentatonic and a major pentatonic. Our minor pentatonic is where we're going to start because it is probably the most closely related to the blues scale. And if you're really looking for an alternative of what to teach other than the blues scale, this is where I would start. Now, as you can see from the musical example, this is made up of a root, a flat third, a fourth or an 11th, a fifth, a flat 7, and a root. So it sounds like this. Now, hopefully you can hear that that sounds very similar to the blues scale, and actually all the notes are there except for one. We'll talk about that in a moment. Now, our other one is the major pentatonic scale. It's still a 5-note scale. It just has a slightly different recipe. It is a root, a second or a 9, a third, a fifth, a sixth, or a 13th, and the root. Now, the thing that we want to key in about these two pentatonic scales is they're actually just one pentatonic scale. It just depends if we're playing major or minor. They are connected in the same way that our major and minor scales are connected, by being relative to each other. For example, if we play B flat minor pentatonic and we compare that to D flat major pentatonic, the relative, we can see that they're actually the same notes. Now the D flat major pentatonic. Clearly the range is different and how the notes relate to the key center is different, but they're actually the exact same pitches. Now we can do the same thing if we start with the major pentatonic and move to the relative minor pentatonic. So here's B flat major. And then moving to G minor. Now this connection of major and minor would probably not be the very first thing I would work on with students when I'm working with these pentatonics, but it's an incredibly important connection to understand to really see how these scales work and can be applied across different tunes. Now you might be saying, Sean, these scales are almost exactly identical to the blues scale. The minor pentatonic is just the same as the blues scale, it's just that the blues scale has an E natural in it as well as an E flat. The major pentatonic is the same as the so-called major blues scale, sometimes called the Kansas City scale, has both a natural third and a flatted third in it. And this is true. And we surely want to know that these kind of different note choices are available so they can inform the vocabulary that we kind of develop for our language. However, if we simplify down to these very simple scales, it can sometimes be more successful for beginning students. So that's some of the foundational kind of like music theory stuff surrounding pentatonic scales. Let's talk about the second thing that we want to work on with our students in order to help them play better when they're playing sort of blues scale-ish ideas. We're going to take these pentatonic scales and move them through some different sort of practice techniques. These are great to do with a full ensemble, great to do in warm-up as a way to kind of develop students' improvisational language while also firming up some of their music theory knowledge. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to play these scales across a wider range. Now I'm going to use B flat minor pentatonic for all the examples today, but this would work in any pentatonic scale. It would actually also work well with the blues scale if you wanted to use that as kind of the foundational music theory element that you were going to work on. Now since we are playing trombone today, I'm going to play this from a low B flat up to a high F, staying in that minor pentatonic scale. This is going to be great for sort of intermediate level players that are probably going to be able to play up to that high F relatively confidently. This is when most students typically start working on improvisation if they have jazz band at school. Now, no mysteries there as far as playing this scale up to high F. We just want to think about extending the range that students think my melodies can be built in. As we heard from the example at the beginning, a lot of times students get stuck in that first octave of B flat when they're first learning how to improvise because that's the only range they know the scale in. So we want to get them to expand that range across their entire usable range. Now, if you're doing this with a full ensemble, you may have to consider, where the range sits for alto saxophone, all that type of stuff. But for us as trombone players, that's probably going to be the best place to start, is from low B flat up to high F, back down. Once we're feeling confident about playing this scale across our entire usable range, we want to think about breaking this into some chunks to practice it in different small chunks. 3-note groupings, 4-note groupings, these work best. Let's check out what that would sound like. For the first one, I'm going to use 3-note groupings, and I put it into a specific rhythm just so it would kind of sit better, feel more swinging, but you don't necessarily have to do that. It really depends on what you think will work best for your students. 1, 2, 3, 4. Cool. Now we could also do 4-note groupings. This one I just did 8th notes. Those type of patterns often work better with the pentatonic scale than with the blues scale, just because there are no little like chromatic sections in the scale. For example, where we go from E flat to E natural to F, sometimes that can just create more pleasing sounding melodies. All right, now that we're probably hopefully feeling a little confident with the note choices, let's try to add some rhythm into this to really make this feel a little bit more like an idiomatic idea in jazz. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up the scale and then back down the scale. No chunks or repeated notes this time. But we're going to think about a specific rhythm and fit the entire scale into that rhythm. So let's look at an example. 1, 2, 3. Another possibility. there's an endless possibility with these, and I would really encourage you to have your students create these. If they know the scale, they can put it in a rhythm. Maybe a student plays it, everybody else plays it back to them. Or the instructor plays it, everybody else plays it back. There are lots of ways you can vary this exercise to make it work for a one-on-one lesson or a full ensemble rehearsal. The final way that we're going to introduce some variation into this scale practice is actually by turning this scale into some pieces of vocabulary. Now, we're not delving deeply into what vocabulary is in today's lesson, but kind of the long and short of it is we can take ideas either from recordings or in this case from a scale that is predetermined, and we're going to create short musical ideas based on those ideas. For examples today, this is going to be our sort of base idea. All right, classic kind of like blues idea. It's all in the pentatonic scale. I happen to play it in the upper octave, but you could play it in the lower octave as well. What we would want to do with this with our students is say, that's our baseline. Now, we're going to think of as many ways as we can vary that as possible. This could be note choice, rhythm. This could be inflection. It could even be sound. But we want to still be able to recognize that kind of kernel of an idea or that base of vocabulary that we're doing. This is a great one to do with a full ensemble. Maybe while the rhythm section is keeping time or by working with a play along. Each student varies it in a new way, almost like, kind of the old school game of telephone where you say an idea across an entire chain of people and it gradually changes as it goes. Same thing here. So let's look at a few ways that I might vary this idea. So again, here's my base idea. A simple variation of just changing a note. Maybe I change a little rhythm. Maybe I start to think about some inflection. Maybe I kind of throw it all together. Again, there's an endless number of variations that you could do here, and this is really where you want to encourage your students to be creative while using this sort of baseline of an idea or of the scale or whatever. All right, those are a handful of ideas of alternate things to cover rather than just leaning totally on the blues scale as the foundational element for students just getting started as improvisers. Now, there's nothing wrong with the blues scale for sure. It is an important concept, and certainly I play ideas that are kind of from the blues scale. However, when it comes to our students, we want to give them information that is very achievable and will last them through their entire improvisational development. And pentatonic scales are a great way to do that. All right, we'll see you all in the woodshed.